When I first heard about the split perspective story that Remedy was going for with Alan Wake 2, my most anticipated game for years, a game I'd been begging for, dreaming of for close to a decade, feverishly consuming every slight hint and reference in Quantum Break, and then the more on-the-nose connections in Control, my heart sank. Swapping leads is a rather tricky practice at the best of times, with some success along the way, absolutely. But when it fails, it is disastrous. It both destroys the experience for the old and dedicated fans, but poisons the well for new fans. I have no interest in watching the new Last of Us show. I've never finished the first game, and what's the point when I know the second game is so divisive? Yes, I may be in the percentage that loves it, but why risk putting that much time and that much emotional connection into that 50-50 chance? The risk just isn't worth it for me personally. I've never cared much or been overly engaged with Star Wars, but I saw the first 2 movies of the new trilogy, and I watched the Obi-Wan series because I grew up with the Clone Wars, so I was sort of keen, but even I was incredibly confused by their treatment of their legacy characters. Media at the moment seems to really struggle with combining the old and the new. They're constantly taking from the old, but never really giving it its dues. And I'll be honest, I was more influenced than I'd like to admit by those random, pretty hateful content creators that just see any woman appearing in an established series as a sign of the coming of the beast or something. The amount of them that instantly disregarded the game started to worry me. They sort of made me forget the fact that Remedy has yet to ever disappoint when it comes to their characters. Remedy proved that Saga was the only type of character that could truly follow after Alan into the dark. The start of the game, narrated by Alan, immediately builds a great deal of tension, the rising tones of the music.
This is not the story I hoped it would be.
The almost kaleidoscope-like visuals, the use of atmospheric and very focused lighting, with heavy reliance on some of the most incredible sound design and foley. Building an unease, discomfort, a surrealist, psychedelic experience where reality cannot contain the nightmare beneath. Like a rippling surface, it breaks. The tension is broken by brutality, gore, insane volume before cutting away. The experience of Alan Wake 2 in a single, solitary scene. The first moment with Nightingale serves to show how far from the shore we truly are. The handrails are gone, the raft has been punctured, and we are treading water. The events of Alan Wake are long past. This is a different type of story. Darkness and light has changed. The darkness is more terrible, more horrific. The torchbearer is gone. The Lady of the Light is gone. We are so very out of our depth. And then... Saga arrives. Saga's introduction is a tone shift, but not a nauseatingly abrupt one like we see so much in cinema. It doesn't break the moment, it improves it. Her scene is immediately family-focused. The music switches, and within a few lines of dialogue, I immediately knew she was a character I could connect with. We had just watched absolute monstrosity, complete horror, and she was a human being. The contrast is night and day, and it works perfectly. Before we grasp her capabilities, before we are given a chance to weigh her up against Alan, they immediately start getting their hooks in. When it comes to implementing a new main character, something I learnt from my own work on a horror audio drama I work with is when we change main characters, is that basically you're robbing the audience and you need to convince them very, very quickly that the alternative is worth their time. Now, the family angle is a little cliched, but I disagree with the idea that we need to toss out something just because it is a cliche. If it works, and if it's true to the character, it's true. And for Saga, it rings both true and works. Part of the reason we are in the issue of so many characters falling short is due to a hatred of cliches and an attempt to subvert expectations. That only works if the subversion is also a functional story arc. Cliches work for a reason. They are tried and true. We then get Saga contrasted against Alex Casey. This moment to me highlights the reason Saga is more or less the only type of character that could truly follow up Alan as a protagonist. Casey is fun, he's grumpy, hard-boiled, a bit mean, and far too caring for his own good. Saga and Casey bring out the best in each other and work perfectly as a duo throughout the story. But Casey couldn't at all operate as the main character. With the dark, monstrous tones of the story as a whole, Casey has nothing to add but cynicism. His soul is a little too dark, his mind too burdened. It would honestly just be too much, dealing with absolute brutal violence and then hearing him go on about his divorce, before jumping back to a scene where Alan's just getting absolutely mentally tortured. Saga, thankfully, isn't a sparkly, Marvel-style, quippy, ignorant character that makes me want to cringe out of existence, but she is the new torchbearer, so to speak, the new champion of light, so she needs to bring some light into the story, and that she does. She is inquisitive and smart. Remedy masterfully weaves this into the gameplay with the Mind Place. She has family ties and strong loyalty to her family, which is what makes her and Casey's connection such a wonderful part of the game. It's also what connects her into Bright Falls at large and reveals more about the town as a whole. Saga reveals more about the old and the new to us. I heard in an interview just before the game came out an interesting point, that Saga's side of the story was more like a true continuation from Alan Wake. It is the most similar, running around the woods, flashlight in hand, finding pages, just trying to piece everything together before a loved one is taken for good. Whereas Alan's story is so greatly different than what any of us could have anticipated. He is almost unrecognisable, and that is perfect. I think this takes us on to the next reason why I believe Saga to be such a great follow-up to Alan. When I first heard the connections between Control and Alan Wake, I assumed we would be heavily following the Bureau agents as they investigate the events of Cauldron Lake, using high-tech equipment and extreme amounts of knowledge and supernatural means to stop the situation. This idea was so bland to me. To explain this, I'm going to need to draw on one of the big inspirations for Alan Wake, and that is Stephen King. One of King's best works, and work that I don't doubt for a moment that Sam Lake has read and has informed some of his choices with the first game, is Salem's Lot. I've read Salem's Lot, I think 4 times now. It's over 700 pages and is the definition of a slow burn. Nothing really major happens till about a third of the way into the book, and you don't get into the main crux of the disaster till the last quarter. It tells the story of a small town from the perspective of around a dozen different characters, as the town is slowly taken over by vampires. As all the different characters become vampires, their stories end, till we are left with the last 2 of the cast, going up against the whole town. It's an absolutely horrific tale, made all the more horrible by seeing characters with such amazing stories and character arcs be absolutely robbed by the narrative of a complete arc. No one gets what they deserve in this book, which on a side note reminds me a great deal of Cynthia Weaver, but that's a video for another time. It's that slow burn, that coming to realization, the slow fading away of reality into madness, the realization of the unreal that keeps a book like that entertaining over the hundreds of pages until something actually happens. It's those moments that made Alan Wake so enthralling to us from the start. The dissolving of reality around us, giving way to darkness. Mystery and the unknowable. That was the horror of the original game. It's that story of a normal man becoming the torchbearer for the light, is what made us love Alan and so eagerly await his return for so many years. And I knew if we were playing as Bureau agents, there would be none of that. They are already in the know, they've seen worse, so what does any of this craziness matter to them? It's why I feel the stuff of the Bureau was some of the weakest parts. But by that same merit, we've already had the story of a normal man having to come to terms with the supernatural. We couldn't do it again. That's why Saga is once again such a good fit. She both isn't the Bureau, but also isn't a normal person. She's an FBI agent. She has experience. The idea of killing someone isn't a huge moral quandary to her that we have to deal with over heaps of cutscenes. She's experienced with murder sites, questioning, things not adding up. She has a flair of the supernatural around her already with the Mind Place. She's a step further ahead than Alan was at the start of the story, and it allows her to follow the same path without retreading his steps, which is just absolute masterful work by Sam Lake and the team. She is different enough, strange enough, familiar enough, light enough and dark enough to be separate from Alan without being a full departure. She is interesting, inquisitive, enthusiastic, and enough of a beacon to be different from Casey and other such characters in the game. But she is so profoundly human that we can connect with her. Her crisis point of the game, her lowest low, is an emotional breakdown. She is profoundly human in an unhuman, monstrous environment. She is an anchor and a lighthouse in the storm of Alan Wake 2.